Sunday. You want some good news? Emily, where are you? Here, stand up, Emily. Everybody turn and say, Ongyan Hasiko. Did I say it right? Pretty close. She's back from Korea. She was in South Korea for, what, about 6 months?
Yeah.
And so it's good to have you back. And also, Kate Costio is getting married on November sometime. November 10th. And so we have that announcement today that there's another wedding happening in the church. So also want to introduce to you Daniel and Iris Hicks. Where are you? They're right back there. He is the director of the city mission. And they're just here visiting the church. They go around and visit churches from time to time. So we welcome you to the church service. If you have any questions about the city mission, feel free to ask him. I'm sure he'd be glad to answer some questions there. And I was talking about one of the programs that they have there, kind of a reentry type program that's just excellent. And I was talking with him a little bit about that. And the wall back there, we're still working on it. We're plugging a little bit about every day, so you'll see some progress on it. And hopefully we can start getting some primer on it pretty soon. So it's a good project to have going in the church. I have another good news, and I can't remember what it is. I always do that. I always think of all the good news things and I forget about them. So, all right, men. Well, not yet. Let's say our memory verse. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love Him. 1 Corinthians 2:9. What's our purpose? Loving God, transforming lives, and serving the Lord. Men, I'm helping you out now, men. You ready? Ready?
Ready.
Tuesday is? All right, I'm letting you know that. Tuesday is Valentine's Day. And so men, all the women are looking at you now saying you have no excuse. The pastor stood up and said it's Valentine's Day this week coming up. So I'm just letting you know that. It's not Super Bowl Sunday. We talked about that for the last month, so that was the month of men. And now we got to talk about Valentine's Day. So there you go. Valentine's Day is, of course, the day of love. And so we're going to be talking about that today in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. A nice definition of love. Unconditional, positive regard for the well-being of others. Notice it's not you, it's others. And I want to talk about that today in the worship service. 1 Corinthians. Why did Paul write 1 Corinthians? Why did Paul see it necessary to have a whole chapter in Corinthians dealing with love? Well, I think you got to understand what was going on in the Corinthian church at that time. The church of Corinthian was, of course, established in Corinth, which is on Asia Minor, kind of the area around Turkey. And the Corinthian church, or the city of Corinth, is about 2 miles from the shore. So it was a great trading area. You have the land, people coming up from the land, and then you could also have the people coming in from the sea. So it kind of became an international city. And with an international city, you also have all the international problems that are associated with it. Multi-religion, multi-ethnicity, multi is what was going on there. It's kind of like New York City. If you want to see it, you go into New York City, you're going to see just about everything there. There's many religions in Corinth. Matter of fact, one temple had 3,000 temple prostitutes that were actually there. Great immorality in the city. The good Jew would not go to Corinth. They would say, what good person would go to Corinth? Sometimes we as a church, we kind of look at that way too, is we say, well, why should we be involved in the community? Why should we? Because those areas is where a lot of sinners are. My answer is why shouldn't we? We should be. We need to be. We need to have churches in New York City. We need to have churches in San Francisco. We need to have churches in Las Vegas. We need to have churches in Benton Ridge. We need to have churches in Findlay. You name it, we need to have churches there because there's people who need to know Jesus. And it really doesn't matter what the city is like, the church needs to be there. And I'm a firm believer that if the church is there, and the church is doing exactly what God wants them to do, eventually that community will change. We've seen it throughout history. So why did Paul write Corinthians? Well, there were some problems going on in the Corinthian church. There were divisions. Remember a couple months ago I said, here's the Corinthian church, and some of them were following Paul, some of them were following Apollos, and so that was bringing some division as a result of that. There was also gross sexual immorality that was happening in the church. Paul talks about how the fact that this man was with his father's mother or something like that. I can't remember real quick, but it was just downright strange what was happening. And what happened is that the church was standing up and saying, we're proud of this because we are a tolerant church. There's one word in the English language that I've come to really dislike, and it's the word tolerance. Because yes, we need to be tolerant of each other. We have many different groups of people in this church. We've got the young kids, we've got the older people, we've got the farmers, we've got the city people. And yes, we need to be tolerant of that. But when it comes to sin, the church needs to stand up and say, this is wrong. And unfortunately, many of our churches in America are coming to the point that they pride themselves on being tolerant. And they allow sin in the church. Now, sinners need to be in the church. Don't get me wrong. But there comes a point where the church needs to stand up and say, this is wrong. And so this gross sexual immorality was happening in the church, and they were proud of it. And Paul was just flabbergasted that they were proud of it. He heard that fellow believers were going and they were having lawsuits against each other. So, if I didn't like what you were doing, I would take you to court to get money as a result of that. There was conduct that was unbecoming the Lord's Supper. They weren't holding the Lord's Supper to high regard that it should be. There are times when you as a church and you as a congregation, and even you as an individual Christian, if you don't feel you're right with the Lord, there comes times that you just want to bypass communion for that. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you're using it as an opportunity of reflection and getting right with the Lord once again. There was a three-man delegation consisting of Stephanus, Fortunus, and Acadius that arrived in from Corinth, and they had a letter to Paul, and they had some questions about marriage, about the virgins, about food sacrificed to idols, about spiritual gifts, the collection of the saints, and Apollos. So all of these things were going on, and this church was infighting. A lot of stuff was happening. They were taken to court. They were involved immorally. They were saying, I follow Paul, I follow Apollos. And finally Paul says, and you call yourself a church of love? Every church that every pastor applies for, they will always ask, what is the greatest aspect of your church? And almost every church will say, we're a loving church. Oh, we're a loving church. And Paul is saying, let me tell you what love really is. If I speak in tongues of men and angels and do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all the mysteries and all the knowledge, and I don't have love, and I have faith that can move mountains but not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my bodies to the flames, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered, it keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease, and where there are tongues, they will be stilled, and where there is knowledge, it will pass away. That passage, by the way, that particular passage is what a lot of people use to say that some of the spiritual gifts are not in operation today. They are in operation. My God doesn't change. There will come a time where they will cease. We're not going to need these in heaven. but I do believe that God gives them to the church even today. Are there abuses? Yes, as in anything. But God gives it for the church today. For we know in part, we prophesy in part, but when the perfection comes, the imperfect disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. Now we see a poor reflection in the mirror, and when we see face to face, now I know in part that I am fully known, even as I am fully known. But these three remain. What are they? Faith, hope, and love. But what's the greatest? Love is the greatest. This week we're going to recognize Valentine's Day. In the Western culture, we've kind of changed what love actually is. Anybody remember this show? Now, some of you younger ones don't. But some of us older ones remember this 1970 show called Love American Style, and they would show this couple that started dating and all this other stuff that was going on. And they said, this is what true love actually is. But you know what? I never saw in Love American Style an elderly couple holding hands. Or somebody that was taking care of their Alzheimer's wife or husband. Or somebody that was taking care of their spouse who was now in a vegetative state. I never saw that on Love American Style. What we all saw was what society, Western society, considers love to be, which is feelings and selfishness. We turn around and we'll say that if he truly loves me, he will do this for me. If she truly loves me, she will do this for me. It's all self-centered. And when we don't have our self-centeredness fed, then what we say is, I'm just going to go find somebody else that can meet my needs. How many of us heard that before? He or she is not meeting my needs. Well, that's totally 100% self-centeredness. I talk about this every once in a while, that the greatest time of love I ever had for my wife, when I felt the closest to my wife, when I felt like I was the man in the house, and I felt like this is it, and it was when she had a brain tumor. When Polly was in the basement, in the man cave, and she could do nothing else but sit in a chair and have all the lights off and have absolutely no stimuli. For those 2, 3, 4 weeks that she was down there, she could do absolutely nothing for me, but I'm going to tell you, I felt the closest to her at that point. You know why? Because that's the purity of love. Unconditional, positive regard for the well-being of others.